I am so excited. I'm like giddy excited to introduce Flynn Skidmore, who is my guest today. Hi, Flynn. How are you?
Hey, today's been a really good day. It's been packed full of working on different things, but I'm liking everything that I'm working on. So I'm feeling happy and really excited to be here.
Oh, I love that. So let's start, let's get right into it because I want to pick your brain for as long as possible.
Amazing.
What is IFS? Because that's the modality of therapy that you focus on, correct?
It's one of them. It's one of the modalities of therapy I focus on. So IFS is internal family systems. Now, the funny thing about IFS is that every single practitioner that I know, not just therapists, but anyone who helps people, the best ones, the coolest people and the best practitioners practice IFS whether or not they know it. So it's this way IFS presents this system that helps us relate to different parts of ourselves with curiosity and wonder. It's this really beautiful system of learning to develop a relationship with ourself. So the reason that I say that the best practitioners do it, it's this like very intuitive, beautiful, nurturing, curious way of exploring our own psyche and exploring our own experience. And it's cool to see how different people just seem to kind of come up with it on their own. And whether or not they know they're practicing IFS, they are practicing IFS. The thing about IFS, just like with any other therapy modality, like the guy Dick Schwartz, who coined the term, he's a really good business person. So he was probably doing what hundreds of other people were doing, and he just turned it into a business and called it IFS. So that's the gist of it.
Okay, I love that. It sounds like, I think to the person that has never heard about it, I think sometimes it can sound very complex and like it's this very I don't want to say loaded, like layered process. But like for example, when you say parts, I feel like that's like such a big part of IFS. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this whole concept of like the different parts of you, it's just like the different things that perhaps like argue with themselves internally. Like you want to do one thing, but you do another. Is that kind of correct? Am I on the right track?
Yeah, that's one of the things that can happen. So the way that IFS explains it. And this is all laid out in this book called No Bad Parts by Dick
Oh, I
Schwartz.
have
And
that
it's
book.
it's a fantastic, you read it?
I haven't read it. It's on my nightstand, but I should.
It's it's so good. It's so good. He does a beautiful way of explaining how this works. Um, so here's the idea is that we all have something called a higher self. In IFS, it's called the capital S self. So capital S self. The higher self has infinite, unconditional access to well being. So the higher self could be in hell, literally in hell, and experiences peace and groundedness, right?
Right.
So it's this part of ourself, just infinite access to well being. Now, through our development, we have experiences that let us know that it's not safe to be in a state of well being. Relationships with parents, relationships with friends at school, whatever. Like we have these experiences that let us know that it's actually safer to be in a state of anxiety or fear or despair or overwhelm, right? These are certain parts of us that learn rules about the world. So maybe one part of me learns this rule that's like, in order to be valuable, I have to be better than everyone else, right? So so I need to be valuable because when I'm perceived as valuable, then I get to be safe. So in order for me to be safe, I need to figure out how to be better than everyone, right?
Right.
That's how a part might see the world. That particular part believes that in order for it to have love, safety, and belonging, it needs to figure out how to be better than everyone, right? So what the process of IFS is learning how to see that part, become aware of that part's existence, and develop a relationship with it where you're really just like, you accept the part, you see that it's there, you ask questions about it, you see what that part looks like. It's usually a version of yourself, maybe when you're 6 or 7, and you just have a curious, loving relationship with it. That is the thing that transforms that part. So we could go super deep into it, but that's the gist. And the idea is that we have many parts who each have different ideas about the best thing to do to keep us safe. Maybe I need to be validated by this group of people. I need to be better than this group of people. I need to keep my mouth shut and remain small. All these different ways of keeping us safe that oftentimes, like you mentioned, are in conflict with one another.
Right. I think that's also the fact that we have many different parts inside us. I think is also something that explains really well why we could be really good at one thing in life. You know what I mean? Because maybe like that part has a more healthy, grounded belief. It never experienced too much trauma or conflict that like led it astray. And then there's this complete other area of your life that you just find that you're constantly in anxiety over, that you can't seem to get it right. And sometimes it just feels a little bit chaotic because it's like not so much like what part am I, but both of those things existing, I think can really confuse a person. You know what I mean? Especially when it comes to like, who am I and what do I want and how do I define myself? I mean, at 18, they ask you that in order to get in college, and it's just like so overwhelming. You know what I mean? But I think
Mm-hmm.
it's this constant thing that we're faced with in life. And that's a really great perspective to realize that like all of those things can coexist inside a person. So I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's to me, it is a life changing perspective. Like what you were saying with like some areas I feel grounded, whereas in other areas I feel chaotic and frenzied, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's happening there is that that person has, through their conditioning, through their experiences, has learned that one particular environment is safe for them to be connected with their higher self, and another environment is not safe for them to be connected with their higher self. So to make that really simple, like let's say a person likes practicing yoga alone in their house, right?
Right.
In that environment, the lights are low, the candles are on, no one's around. It might be easy for them to access groundedness and peace, joy, whatever. They're picking up that that's an environment where it's safe for them to experience that, right?
Right.
Whereas that same person might have social anxiety because their conditioning has taught them that being around other people is unsafe, that it's threatening, you could be rejected. And their body is responding to that rejection like death because we're such tribal animals, we need belonging. So if a kid is learning at 5 years old that they're going to be rejected or judged or made fun of, their body is learning that other people are not safe, right? So that same person who experiences well-being when alone doing yoga then goes into this other environment where there are people around or at a party, and it activates a part of them that is learned to protect them when they believe that they're not safe. So for some people, that might be like doing the most and being super extra at the party, like seeking attention. That's how they would navigate it, right? Another person might navigate that by making themselves small and being shy and wanting to hide away. All of those things are like strategies that people use to protect themselves when they don't feel safe. So yeah, we learn that some environments are safe to be the version of ourselves that we want to be, and we learn that other environments are not safe to be the version that we want to be.
Right. And it sounds a lot like also what you're saying is a bit like authenticity, you know, to like who you truly are and like how certain experiences and how certain things can perhaps get in the way of actually being in that true authenticity in like any situation.
I yes, and also I like in work that I do with people and with myself, I don't use the word authentic because it's not very, to me, it's not very specific, right? So, like, if I'm with a group of people and I'm like, okay, I just want to be authentic, well, I
Yeah.
don't really know what that means, you know? Whereas if I'm with a group of people and I'm like, okay, well, my intention is to be grounded, kind, and joyful and to have fun, then it's like, okay, now I have a sense of how I want to experience this thing, right? Grounded, joyfully, with kindness, and have fun. Then that's easier for me to have the experience that I want to have. Whereas if I'm saying, okay, I want to go into this group of people and I want to be authentic, what I find personally is that that just sets me up to be like, oh my God, this wasn't authentic. I need to be authentic. Like, what, you know what I mean? And it creates
Yeah.
all this questioning and doubt and confusion. So, you know what I'm saying there? So, yes,
Yeah.
it's about authenticity, but I think the next step is being more specific about how we want to feel when going into a particular environment.
Well, I love that you are essentially calling out that word because it is a very trendy word, and I think it's used very much, especially nowadays, you know what I mean? And there is something stressful now about like what is and isn't authentic, and what you just said, where it's like I want to be authentically myself, but then say you have a negative emotion or like a negative reaction in the party to something, and then having had the purpose, quote unquote, to like show up authentically and then have a negative emotion, I think can lead to like, oh, I'm like a not a bad person, but inherently like I have like all these bad things, and maybe that's why nobody likes me because I have all these feelings and they don't. So yes, it is a very um loaded, like out there word to use for things. I love your approach.
You're getting at it perfectly. Like it's so cool to see how quickly you understood what I'm where I'm coming from with that. A word like authenticity is very binary. It's like authentic or not authentic. And a word like that sets us up to judge what we think is not authentic, right? When we think that being authentic is a good thing, we then set ourselves up to judge what is not authentic. And when we are engaging in life that way, just like you said, we're setting ourselves up to spiral and asshole, like,
Yes.
I'm not a good person. I'm blah, 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 blah. Whereas if I go into a party and I'm like, I want to have fun, right? I'm
Hmm.
clear that I want to have fun. I know what that feels like in my body. Then let's say something happens like, I'm like making weird eye contact with someone and then they look away really quick. And then I feel anxious, right?
Yeah.
Then I can check in and be like, okay, the way that I'm thinking about this, I'm not having fun anymore. What would it look like to have fun again? So it's like getting clearer on what the compass is that we want to use rather than judging the experience.
Yeah, I think I didn't get it in 2 seconds. I talk about this in therapy with my own therapist, which is why,
Okay,
you
okay, okay.
know,
You got
yeah,
it.
because that sounds really impressive, and I could take the credit, but that's not the case. I think it's just, yeah, like sometimes and because I've been in therapy for like 3 years now, sometimes I'll notice that like something will come up for me and I'll feel a lot of negative emotions around it. And my first reaction, unfortunately, working on it, sometimes is to really judge myself, like
Mhm.
really almost like rejecting the fact that I'm actually feeling those things because I very quickly wish I could get rid of the feeling. And I think that leads me to something else that you talk about a lot, which is awareness and the difference between loving awareness and shameful awareness, and I think for most of my 20s I had shameful awareness about absolutely everything, and I think that leads to, I mean, not everything, but you know what I mean? That's a bit extreme.
I do,
Yeah.
yeah. Me too.
Yeah, I think it's a normal thing because you don't know who you are, and then you're discovering these aspects of you that perhaps you don't like or that aren't serving you. But I think sometimes when you have shameful awareness, you can either get really angry at yourself and the world and become bitter, like, or you can also run away from facing those negative emotions. But to
Hmm.
go back to the awareness thing, I think that's super key because even what you just described about the party, you're you know what I mean? You're like, you just became aware that something that you did made you feel awkward or embarrassed. and you're checking in with yourself and you're not going, oh, you piece of shit, like why are you, you know what I mean, because that's shameful awareness, that's you being like, you were just so
Yep.
awkward, like instead it's like, okay, that felt strange, how can I shift back to focusing on, I want to have a good time, this moment doesn't define the rest of the night, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. So there are two important things that I'm hearing when you're speaking about that. The one is like when we're being aware, what are we even being aware of? That's one thing. And then the other thing is when you're speaking about that, shifting back into the experience we want, I find that most people hear that and think that what that means is ignoring the feeling that they don't like, right?
Right.
So I want to address both of those things because I think both are really important.
Yes,
The
please.
first, yeah, what are we aware of? I think it's helpful to think about there being four layers to awareness. There's what we see, what exists in the three-dimensional world. There's what we're thinking. There's what we're feeling, like what's happening in our body. And then there's this fourth layer that's like the inner knowing, which is like, do I like this experience? What experience might I like instead? That's like the deepest layer of our compass. Most people's awareness, because they're so most people's awareness because they are so invested in trying to figure out how to be accepted by other people, and there's all this chaos and frenzy happening inside of their mind. Most people's awareness are stuck on what they see and a little bit of what they're thinking, right? Where the juice is at, like where life becomes fun, is when you practice being aware of what's happening in your body. So if I'm at that party and someone like looks at me weird or make weird eye contact or whatever, and my awareness is only on what I see and what I think, then I'm trapped in this place of like, everyone hates me, I'm weird, I'm giving the worst vibes, like blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
right? Whereas if I bring my awareness into my body, I would see, oh, my body is like contracted. My body, it feels tense. And this is where the inner knowing comes in. Do I like that? If yes, if I like the feeling of tension in my body, then I'm going to continue thinking everyone hates me, I'm weird, whatever, because that is producing this experience of tension,
Hmm.
right? If I don't like the tension in my body, then what I get to do is ask myself, what would I like to feel instead? Most people want to feel expansion, like openness,
Hmm.
right? So then I can ask, like, what ways of seeing this experience, what ways of experiencing this party might help me feel expansive, right? And that's when you get to like have fun and experiment with different things, right?
Right.
So that's the awareness piece. And then that second piece is like the bypassing, right? So if my body is clenched up like that, right? And then I'm like, oh, I don't want to feel that. I want to feel joy. And then I go and try and pretend I'm feeling joy. I'm not actually feeling joy. That tension and fear is still in my body, right? So that's where internal family systems becomes so helpful because rather than ignoring the part of me that's afraid and like making myself small at the party, I want to bring curiosity to that part of me and like ask it questions and be warm and kind and loving to it. Because when I am warm and kind and loving to the parts of me that are afraid of things, well, then all of a sudden, those parts don't have anything to be afraid of anymore. Those parts were looking to be accepted by other people in order to access love and safety. But now I'm giving that part love and safety. So it doesn't have to do all these calculations about how to present to the rest of the world in order to be accepted. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's really
So it's,
powerful because you're giving
yeah.
it to yourself. It's more, it's like accepting. I mean, I know it's way more complicated than that, but what you are saying is also a version of accepting yourself, like yourself and what you feel. And when I'm hearing you speak about, you know, like still feeling that way and bypassing it and then doing the most, or example, or completely hiding, wouldn't that also be like a different part of you overcompensating for you like completely negating that other part?
Exactly. Exactly. Right. And that's when things get so messy, is when we're afraid of embracing and including our parts.
Mhm.
Right. So let's say we have the part that's doing the absolute most, right? That part might be there to protect another part that feels afraid of people. So in order to like deal with that experience of inferiority, this other part is going to come in and be like, I'm going to make sure that everyone is paying attention to me, and I'm going to have everyone's attention the entire night, and I'm going to be super extra, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's a version of that where that's not a part, and that might just be that person's soul expressing itself.
Mhm.
And I love people who are extra. And also, a lot of the time, extraness is someone using extraness as a strategy to avoid a part of themselves that's afraid. You know,
Right.
life is just so beautiful when, exactly what you're saying, we practice just accepting those parts. Like, instead of running away from them and pushing them away, choosing to lean into them. When that happens, then we get to make a choice about how we want to show up, rather than just being controlled by our subconscious programming.
I mean, mic drop. That's
I'm
so
glad that
good.
hits.
I mean, it's just it's amazing how simple it is, but at the same time how difficult it is, because I think and since we're talking about that awareness, I think something that I struggled with, for example, was awareness, but then shifting it to loving awareness instead of somewhere and instead of a place where I'm judging myself, because it was almost, when you're really nervous to do something, so you procrastinate. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's how I am with my feelings until one day, like, I don't know, like the highlighter falls off the table and I'm like, oh my God, and I start crying because I'm just like, I just need something to cry over. And then I'm like, oh, okay. Or when I talk about my feelings in therapy, then I'm like, oh, okay, that's why I've been like compulsively shopping like a maniac, because I'm just like, what can you hide this feeling? How can I numb out? And it's that's why I'm saying, like, it's simple, but there's also so much about us humans that are trying to run away from doing exactly that, which is just being like, hey, hi, I see you, you're okay, I accept you. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Why is that so difficult to, first of all, do, and then second of all, shift?
I think it's so difficult mostly because we're not taught how to do it. And most people are on their own, trying, hearing people on Instagram talk about having a relationship with themselves, and they're like, okay, so I'm going to do that, but not being taught how to actually do it. I find that when people, it here's the thing, it's this may actually be a better answer. I think it's very difficult to systematize it. It's very difficult for me to create 11 steps to developing a relationship with yourself that applies to all people.
Right.
It's pretty easy for me to help a person do that when we're in a session together. And I, of all the people that I've ever worked with, which is all types of people, like all types of people, actors making an insane amount of money, drug dealers making an insane amount of money, people who are really struggling to make money, people who are angry, like all types of people. I have never found a person who doesn't know how to relate to themselves in a loving way. It just is a matter of being guided through the process. And I wish I could say how to do it. If someone figures that out, and to teach people how to do it, that person is going to be a trillionaire. It's a matter of relationship and being guided in the context of a relationship. I think that that's why it's so difficult.
Yeah. I I mean, I didn't mean to throw such a loaded question at you. You know what I mean? And
No,
how do
it's
we
such a
fix
good
it?
question.
um,
It's such a good question.
yeah, it's hard. I think there's also it. I mean, it's also hard because of what you're saying, right? Like it can't be personalized. So different people have different issues, and those different struggles mean a different solution for every single person.
Yep. Well, here's the thing, right? I can sit here and I can tell people exactly what it is. I can say right now exactly what to do. The human psyche is just so complicated and complex that like I wish it were just immediately available for people. But here's what to do. All we ever have to do is meet what comes into our awareness with awe and curiosity. So when you're on a mountain and you see a sunset over the mountain, your body is wired to experience awe and wonder. It's this like beautiful, magnificent thing, right? We've been conditioned to see ourselves as something different, right?
Right.
So when we think about ourselves, when we think about certain things, we've been conditioned to experience fear, right? All this work is practicing seeing everything that comes into your awareness like a sunset over a mountain. Everything about yourself, everything about other people, the way that you judge other people, the way that you hate other people, the way that you hate certain foods, seeing all of that with awe and wonder, and just allowing things to come to the surface and practicing. Okay, now I'm noticing I'm feeling scared when this is in my awareness. How can I practice experiencing awe and wonder? Got it. Now I'm going about life and then this other thing comes into my awareness and I feel afraid. How can I practice seeing awe and wonder this way? That's what it is, but it seems like it's really helpful for people to be guided through that experience of how to actually do it.
Yeah, of course. Because I'm hearing you, and I think I'm like, yes, absolutely. But I also know that when I'm by myself, I don't always do that. You know what I mean? Versus when I know that I have a therapy session, it's like, okay, it's like, let me sit down, let me think about my week or my 2 weeks or my month, depending how frequently you do it. And like it makes you more introspective because there's that thing, it like it keeps you more disciplined in that way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with seeking out help, whether that's a therapist or it's like a friend, because we are social creatures. And I was just thinking about this, like I do see certain, not therapy, but like certain practices, if you will, online sometimes about like heal yourself to get what you want. Like that's essentially the gist of it. But it's like get what you want is at the other end of it. So it's like telling people like, yeah, do this to get what you want. And I've looked at them, especially pre-therapy. I was like, oh yes, absolutely. I'm going to be a millionaire by Saturday. Amazing. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think sometimes, and this I see this so much in a lot of friends of mine and a lot of family of mine, like we're looking for the magic ticket, if you will, that will lead us out of like all these feelings. And it doesn't really exist. It's a journey inwards, and it's better with like the right guide. I think that's what a
Mm-hmm.
therapist is. Just a really good guide,
Mm-hmm.
like
It's a
inwards.
guide.
Yeah.
Yep. I think that's a great way of seeing it.
Do you think that,
Yeah.
sorry.
You go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you think that same awareness is something that could apply to someone who feels stuck? And I don't mean just stuck like inspirationally or I'm not motivated. I mean stuck in a certain pattern, like always attracting the same type of people, always like, why do I always end up in this kind of job, or why am I here again? Do you think that
Yep.
that's essentially the journey out of that as well, like awareness as to, or self inquiry as to why we're there?
Yep. I really do. So let's take the get what you want thing,
Oh
right?
yes, please, please, let's go there.
It's a it's a great so you know obviously there are people who are selling programs who are speaking about that in one way, and people who are selling programs who might be speaking about it in another way. The Okay, here's how I see what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Getting what you want requires understanding that what you want is available right now because what you want is a feeling. Getting what you want is a result of the way that you are relating to your parts. So if I want, let's say I want $1 million. Why do I want $1 million? Well, that gives me access to like hanging out with certain people and certain food and like certain level of status and all these things, right? And if I break all of those down by asking, what would having that do for you? What would having that do for you? What would having that do for you? You'd arrive at a feeling, right? Maybe I'd feel grounded, joyful, peaceful, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
right? So my mind is making a prediction that having $1 million gives me access to certain feelings that may not be available right now, right?
Right.
That's a part of me who believes that. Now, what I get to do is be curious about that part. So, okay, you're seeing $1 million as the thing that gives you what you want, right? Applying curiosity to that part, learning about that part, seeing what that part looks like. If you give that part love, then that part is getting the thing that it wants as a result of having $1 million. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because when you break, like if say you're getting stressed out because you're not where you want to be financially, which is another way of
Yeah.
putting, hi, great.
Hey, sorry.
No, you're good. So, say you're stressed out financially, you know what I mean? Like, we could, if we're putting it that way as well, but you're not really. Like, because this kind of reminds me a bit of also, like, in a way, this like lack mentality, because essentially what you're saying, like, the first thing is you have to know or believe or actually think it's possible that it's readily available to you, like that thing you want. Because yeah, it is a feeling. Like if you're stressed out and you're thinking that money is going to fix your problem, then it's like it's almost like you have to take the steps backward, you know what I mean, to realize why it is that in that moment you're like, oh god, if I had the $1 million, my life would be so much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's about how you relate to that part that thinks that $1 million will give it something that it currently doesn't have access to. There also is a reality to like having more money gives you more options and access to more choices. And I do think that it's a reality that having more money makes it easier to amplify the experiences that you want, the feelings
Mm-hmm.
that you want, you know? So, like, maybe life is 6 out of 10 joy, and increasing my income by 600% takes 6 out of 10 joy to 9 out of 10 joy. You
Right.
know what I mean? Maybe, who knows, right? But if the part believes that joy is not available right now and it can only be available when there's a certain amount of money here, then it's then it's all about bringing curiosity to that part, relating to that part. That's really it. And if a person can live life like that, then they're always in every single moment getting what they want because they're experiencing the feelings that they want because they're relating to themselves in a particular way.
I mean, in relation to what you're saying about what you want is a feeling, I think you've spoken about this, and I think it's like very much in the same realm of like getting what you want. It's kind of like the emotions that you're constantly looping, producing more of the same emotions that perhaps are unwanted or unpleasant. Similar to like what we're describing. I mean, and I didn't mean to say that like money doesn't, to a certain degree, money absolutely, you know what I mean, like if you need to not be living, I don't know what the word is, but like you need to have your needs met, you know what I mean, in order to like relax. And if you're living in like a survival mode with money, that is incredibly stressful. But as far as
Mm-hmm.
emotions, kind of like attracting more of the same or getting you not what you want. Can you expand a little bit on that? Because I think you talk about this on your IG as well, and I love it.
So let's say let's say a person is experiencing a lot of anger. Okay, here's the thing. What the way that I see my role, what I want to help people with is getting them exactly what they want, to take their vision and turn their vision into reality, right?
Yeah.
Now, most people, okay, so if a person came to me and they were like, I want to be the angriest person in the world, as long as they are not hurting other people
Mm-hmm.
or imposing on other people's will, I would help them be the angriest person in the world. I don't see, and I really mean that. I don't see like a hierarchy to the feelings that we could experience, right? I don't think that we can know that love is better than anger. We can know that uh, love seems to contribute more to life, meaning that people who experience more love live longer and are healthier. But we can't know that that's a good thing, you know.
Yeah, sure.
So if what a person wants is anger, I would help them experience that. Now, most people that I've ever met would consciously say that what they want is joy and well being, right? If, however, that person is experiencing patterns of anger over time, then what's happening is that subconsciously they want to be angry. Now, people want to be angry for a lot of reasons. Usually it's a survival mechanism that they've learned in order to protect parts of themselves that they experience as small and weak, right? So they've learned along the way that the best way to protect those parts of themselves is to like dominate other people. And if I can dominate other people, then people will be afraid of me. And then I can guarantee that no one is going to cross me. Right.
Right.
So, on a subconscious level, if a person is experiencing patterns of anger, then that's exactly what a part of them wants to experience. Right. And if that part of them is steering the ship, meaning that part is taking over control and they're not able to consciously make choices about how they want to show up, then that person is likely to build a life where there's anger, where there's opportunities for anger all over the place. Like you were saying, like when you dropped your highlighter and you cried, you
Mm-hmm.
were waiting for an opportunity to be allowed to cry, right?
Yes.
Because you wanted to cry. It's the same thing with anger. It's like, and so if that's what's happening, if a part of them believes that anger is their best strategy for survival, then they will be angry and they will create a life around them that allows them to be angry over and over. Now, most people would consciously say, I don't want that, right?
Yeah.
So then it's a process of helping them make a choice about what they do want and then creating a life where they get to experience what they do want.
That's really interesting to me because I think like the times in my like what you're saying, I 100% agree with what you're saying, and I also think that something that my therapist has made clear to me, she's like, when something makes you really angry or something reminds you of something and you're really angry, like there was probably a reason, not maybe that exact thing, but like in your past, in whatever that's triggering, there was a reason for you to probably be very angry. You know what I mean? Because I think that happens a lot. Like you're angrier now because now you're an adult and you have the opportunity to express that anger perhaps a little bit more safely, especially towards a situation that you're projecting. But anger also feels like there's so much shame around anger. And there's also just such a loss of control almost of yourself, because I think most people, and this is how I see anger, very few times, unless you have like a sense, like a healthy sense of boundaries, you know, where like if someone is crossing you, you can very quickly get angry as like, hey, like protecting your space, similar to animals. I think sometimes anger, other than that situation, I think anger doesn't really always feel like a choice. You know, it feels like a loss of control and like this impulsive reaction that you later have a lot of shame over, you know, which I think is why that's such an interesting emotion to even talk about, because it's such a complex way. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, why am I so angry? I think is such a it's a sometimes like a very layered question, you know, to even stop being so angry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and what you're getting at is so good, and it involves so many things, because when I'm speaking about making a different choice, right? So if a person is experiencing patterns of anger and they want to experience patterns of groundedness or joy instead, then it is the worst thing to do is to repress the angry part and
Mhm.
bypass it and try and ignore it. That's the worst thing to do. That will make that part more angry, right? So what it's a practice of, it's like it's learning to relate to the anger with curiosity, seeing anger as the same thing as the sun setting over the mountain, right? And will it be perfect at first? Absolutely not. Like rage will take over. But it's that's why this our experience of life is a practice, you know?
Mhm.
Like experiencing anger with curiosity for 2 seconds makes it easier the next time to experience it with curiosity for 6 seconds, you know? And you build and build and build. Um, it's also really important to understand. So the way that we evolved was to be in a state of what we can call safe and social. So we're relaxed, we're safe, we're breathing deeply, our digestive system is functioning really well, we feel at peace, well-being, 7 times more often than we experience fear, right? And in our so it's in a 7-to-1 ratio of well-being to fear, anger, that kind of stuff. So we evolve to experience anger. Like it is an important thing, just like you're saying,
Yeah.
right? And anger, for people who have experienced all types of trauma, anger can be such an important sign of healing, right? Let's say with like a really a kind of simple example would be with people pleasing. If a person has gone through their whole lives people pleasing and they're afraid of getting in trouble and they're afraid of people not liking them, and what they do to navigate them that for their whole lives is make themselves small, right? A sign of that person healing might be for them to get to a place where they're like, no, fuck that. Like, I am not doing that anymore, you know, and then be angry at all the people for whom they had to be small for, you know.
Yeah.
Now, but here's the thing. So that anger is important. It's an essential part in the process of healing and kind of breaking free from certain things. But then a person gets to make that choice. That person who was people pleasing before and is now angry, that person could say, okay, fuck people. I'm never going to accommodate again. I'm never going to be kind. I'm going to spend the rest of my life angry at people. Or they could allow that anger to just be this like this temporary experience and to continue passing through that so that they can access well-being, you know. All of those choices are available. What I think most people would prefer to choose is accessing well-being as soon as possible.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying to me also sounds like you have to be curious and you know about why you're angry and deal with it in that way versus trying to repress it or just, you know, shame yourself for a little bit and then go back to, you know, reality as normal or whatever that saying is. I can't think about it right now. um
Mm-hmm.
and I think in that example that you gave about people pleasing, I think the to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it also sounds like the person that instead of just saying like fuck everyone, I'm just going to be a loner and, you know, live in the middle of nowhere and not talk to anybody, and if I do have to talk to somebody, I'll probably be horrible and they hate me too, and you know, that narrative. And then for the people that use that as in a way of like start using anger in a healthy way of like, no, you know what, I'm not going to do that, and then deal with probably suppressed anger or the anger that comes up at all the moments where you have in a way self-abandoned for other people or whatnot. It also sounds like that to me also sounds like accountability, which I think is so important when you want to change any aspect of your life, because just as much as there's reasons to be angry, there's also the part that you played in certain situations, and that's not to like all of a sudden blame yourself instead of blaming other people, but if you can't hold yourself accountable, yourself and others, then I don't really see how you could shift out of anything really.
Yeah. It's a great point. So it's such a good point. The way that I see accountability is, here are my patterns of experience. Like, okay, so if I'm being really honest, I'm noticing that I'm angry a lot, right? I'm not saying that for me. I'm actually a pretty not angry person.
You seem very
So
chill.
let's say a person was like, I'm noticing that I'm angry. Um, I'm noticing this pattern of anger. I'm angry often, right? That's a person taking accountability. I'm taking account of the experiences that I've been having, and I'm seeing a pattern of anger. Do I like that? Do I want to continue being angry? If yes, then I'm going to continue to do the things that I've been doing to produce anger. Truly, I see nothing wrong with that, as long as no one is being hurt or violated in any way, right? If no, then okay, then I'm going to hold myself accountable for doing things differently in order to experience more of what I would prefer to be experiencing. That to me is what accountability is, like very, very simple.
Yeah, you actually did explain it in a very simple way that I was like, oh, right. Like I'm just taking account of these experiences. That's
Like
so,
an accountant.
yeah, like that's really
Yes.
simple, but that's actually really powerful because I think sometimes accountability also feels like such a big word of like, I have to admit that I'm wrong and like, like all these
Yes.
things when in
Yes.
reality, oh no, I just have to take account of how much this is happening in my life and whether or not I like it.
Yep. Yeah, and I love what you're saying about like the taking responsibility and say that this is my fault. Like that is what I find is what gets in the way of accountability is like people um that's a part that's a little kid part that has learned that if it's at fault for something, then it gets in trouble. And so then people avoid responsibility and accountability because they think that they're going to get in trouble. They're afraid of the idea of it being their fault, you know? So getting that's why parts work is so good, because if you can meet that part that's afraid of taking responsibility, you develop a relationship with that part, then it unlocks responsibility because then that part is no longer afraid.
Right. And it sounds a lot like unlocking that or facing that is also just kind of confronting in a way like the narrative that you tell yourself about responsibility, which is hard obviously if you're not fully aware, because I think first off it's wanting to be aware instead of constantly
Yep,
doing the same thing. Um
totally.
so I'm not done picking your brain about this because you talk a lot about also like your intention behind things, and like I think based on what we're saying also, and it's also really nice to hear you say that like, look, if you want to stay angry and that works for you, then by all means, if you're not hurting anybody, I guess that's fine, you can do that. I've actually never heard a therapist say that, which I think is just kind of like, oh, okay, I guess, yeah, what's the big deal. um
You'll die sooner,
yeah.
and you'll be less satisfied, but like, like,
Yeah.
yeah, I really believe that it's fine to choose that if you want to.
Right. But I do think that in relation to that, if you if you are like, I don't want to choose that and why do I keep feeling this way? I think you made a video about like the universe, which I both love that the whole universe thing that is like so trendy right now, and I also, a part of me is like really irritated about that, with the whole like the
Mhm.
universe and deservingness, and if you do this, then you're communicating to the universe, and I'm like, the universe is not a person, but
Yeah.
we are, and I think based on what you're saying, it also makes a lot of sense of like you will find a lot of opportunities to be angry and project whatever your anger is actually about onto absolutely everything if you are okay choosing that anger over and over again, versus actually trying to do something about it and like with intentionality being like, you know what, I'm going to observe this and then I'm going to choose to have fun on this walk or feel light on this walk instead of choosing that this walk is about thinking of all the things that I hate and being really angry as I walk down this
Mhm.
park or whatnot. I think that's like a very, I think, healthy and like concise way of looking at kind of like why you have the life you have and like why you are quote unquote attracting things. I don't know if you want to expand on that because you talk a lot about that too.
Yeah, so I'm glad you say the thing about the universe because I generally hate that too. It
It's
annoys
just,
me.
yeah, I
Uh,
know.
yeah, and I think that point about speaking about the universe like it's a person. My friend Atara, who I really like, he's a creator.
I
He says that
love
like when people speak
Atara.
about the universe, yeah, yeah, okay.
Yes.
He always talks about how people get in like a codependent relationship with the universe, like, and it's so true. So the universe, the way that I think about it, so what you said was really interesting. Like the universe isn't a person, we are. The way that I think about it is that the universe is a system and we call ourselves a person, but what we are is also a system. And so systems interact with each other, right? Now, systems also have goals. So it might be the goal of a system to be operating with anger, right? And what that really means is that this gets into like, I don't even know how worth it is to go into this, but
No, let's
like,
go
okay,
into it.
so,
Let's go into it, please.
okay. All right. So there's this perspective that's called systems theory, right? In systems theory, larger systems are made up of smaller systems. So a person is made up of organ systems, which are made up of organs, which are made up of tissues, which are made up of cells, which are made up of proteins, which are made up of smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Now, in a system, systems generally operate top down, right? So what that means is if I make a choice to experience calmness and then I want to breathe in a calm way, that choice will move down into all the other systems to affect my organ systems. It'll affect my organs, my tissues, how my cells are functioning, and all that, right? So top down has more influence than bottom up. So if one of my cells decided, oh, I want to be operating with calmness, it would have a really difficult time motivating and influencing all of the other systems going up to be calm if what my mind wanted to do was to be angry. Is that making sense?
Yeah, that makes, I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by this. Yes, that makes all the sense.
Okay, cool. I'm glad that makes sense. So, okay, in a system, there's always a goal, right? Now, for people, what that goal really is a feeling. And what a feeling is our body operating at a particular frequency. So what I mean is like, if I'm in an environment where I'm looking at a sunset over the mountain, it makes sense for my goal in that environment to be awe and wonder and appreciation, right? If I'm then in an environment where like a grizzly bear rolls up on me, then it becomes my system's goal to experience fear and to run, right? So if my goal is to be experiencing well-being, right? Then my body is operating at a frequency, like my cells are buzzing in a way that aligns with well-being, right? It's like creating a musical note, like a certain musical note that's in tune and coherent.
Right.
Now, one of the things that happens in the universe that seems to happen over and over and over is that like systems harmonize with other like systems. So in the universe, like if one system is playing a certain musical note that's coherent and it harmonizes, and there's another system that's playing a similar note and those two notes can harmonize, those systems will be attracted to each other. They'll want to create more of what they're experiencing.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it sounds like trauma
So,
bonding.
so exactly.
Yeah.
That's such a good take. If my system's goal is to be experiencing fear, right? So if I'm diagnosed with PTSD, I'm just, what that really means is that I'm experiencing patterns of fear more than I'm experiencing patterns of well-being, right? Then I will seek out other systems that are experiencing something similar.
Yeah, and that
That's
frequency will feel like, oh shit, this is home. This feels exactly like what I know, and which is why it feels comfortable and why you keep doing it and
exactly,
why it's so hard to break.
exactly,
I
exactly.
love this system's like it's a theory.
Yeah, it's called systems theory. It's like a way of seeing the world. It's really cool, and it's what's at the root of family systems theory
Yeah.
or family systems therapy.
Well, right, because you're taking like when you're traveling, I mean traveling is, but going inward into yourself to actually explore all these different parts of yourselves, you're taking agency. Like it's the bigger system telling everything else to calm down or to do this or to do that, which it's like, yes, okay, then you can take control of your life versus like I'm going to eat broccoli because I heard that it's good for my liver. It's like,
It's
no.
right. That's such a. I'm so glad you're bringing it to that because in family systems therapy, each part is it's called a subsystem, right? So let's say a part of me gets activated, and it's a part that believes that it needs to be better than everyone else and it needs to dominate people, right? So when that system takes over, when that system is in control, then all of the subsystems align with the goal of that system to be experiencing like anger, right?
Right.
So when that part takes over, then my body language and my posture aligns with that part. My breathing patterns align with that part. The neurochemicals that my brain is producing aligns with that part. What like the proteins that my body is producing align with that part. How my genes are expressing themselves aligns with that part. That part takes over, and then all of the subsystems align with the goal of that part, which is like to dominate other people, whatever, right?
Right.
So you're exactly right. So what family systems therapy is about seeing all those different systems and learning about them.
What you just said also reminded me of I don't know if you know who Dr. Gabor Mate is.
Mm-hmm.
So he just came out with this book and he basically talks, it's exactly what you're saying. So like if you, for example, he talks a lot about how like women have more I think it's like chronic illnesses or like things like arthritis, and he mentions other things that are evading my mind right now, but it's exactly what you're saying. It's like you are like that over pleasing thing that maybe someone has or someone has been taught to have is like it's taking so much over your system that it's also taking over your body. And so like you are
Yes.
um in Spanish it's somatizar, which is like when you're actually showing it in your body. Like this thing, like
Yes.
eventually over time, it's like, yes, certain diseases directly linked with certain emotions or like the repeated experience of that emotion over time, because that is exactly the system that is taking over your body, and there are consequences to that.
Exactly, right? That's what it is. So if someone is people pleasing, the reason that they're people pleasing, they're motivated to do that not because they're attracted to the idea of people pleasing. They're doing it because they are trying to avoid the consequences of not people pleasing,
Right.
right? So they may have learned that disappointing people is terrifying. So if they're engaging in people pleasing throughout life, their body is constantly running away from something. It's constantly in a state of fear, which means that it's creating inflammation. So every single time that person is interacting with another person, what's actually happening is that their body is just in an inflamed state. And if that's happening over and over and over and over again, that's like playing a musical note that's out of tune. It's going to wear on that string, and that string is going to break sooner, you know? So that's why trauma is associated with chronic illness,
Right.
because it's the pattern of experiencing fear over and over and over and over and over again, which wears the body down. Now, when I say that thing about anger, like you'll die faster if you're angry, that's what I'm talking about. And like, it's because those experiences of fear, anger, despair, overwhelm, they just wear our bodies out.